The Tylenol poisonings, Chicago, 1982. The air in Chicago was crisp that late September morning in 1982, the kind of autumn day where the leaves crunched underfoot and the city hummed with its usual rhythm. Families bustled through suburban streets, workers grabbed coffee at corner diners, and drugstore shelves gleamed with rows of familiar product. Among them, Tylenol Extra Strength, Tylenol, to be exact, sat innocently in its red and white packaging, a household name trusted by millions. It was the go-to remedy for headaches, fevers, and sore throats, a staple in medicine cabinets across America. No one could have imagined that within those unassuming capsules lurked a silent, invisible killer, waiting to unleash a nightmare that would scar the nation forever. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the sleepy suburb of Elk Grove Village. 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up feeling under the weather on the 29th of September, 1982. Her parents, Dennis and Gina, thought little of her complaints of sore throat, maybe a cold. They handed her a single Tylenol capsule, expecting it to ease her discomfort so she could rest. Mary swallowed it obediently and shuffled to the bathroom. Moments later, a thud echoed through the house. Dennis called out, "Mary, are you okay?" No answer. His voice grew sharper, tinged with unease. Mary? Still nothing. He pushed open the bathroom door, and his world shattered. His little girl lay crumpled on the floor, her face pale, her body lifeless. By 7 a.m., Mary Kellerman was dead, her young life snuffed out in a matter of minutes. The cause? Unknown. The coroner's initial report was vague, sudden collapse, perhaps a heart issue, but something felt wrong, horribly wrong. 10 miles away in Arlington Heights, another tragedy was unfolding. Adam Janis, a 27-year-old postal worker, felt a headache creeping, and that same morning, he popped 2 Tylenol capsules from a bottle on his kitchen counter, expecting relief. Instead, his heart began to race, his vision blurred, and a searing pain tore through his chest. He collapsed, gasping, as his family rushed to his side. Paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Adam was pronounced dead, his death initially chalked up to a massive heart attack. His grieving family gathered at his home, shell-shocked by the loss. Among them were his brother, Stanley Janis, 25, and Stanley's wife, Teresa, just 19. Overwhelmed by grief and battling headaches of their own, they reached for the same bottle of Tylenol Adam had used. Within hours, Stanley was dead. 2 days later, Teresa followed, her body succumbing to the same mysterious force that had claimed her husband and brother-in-law. 3 deaths in one family, all within days. The coincidence was too stark, too sinister, to ignore. The horror didn't stop there. In Elmhurst, 35-year-old Mary McFarland, a vibrant mother, took Tylenol for a nagging headache and collapsed at her workplace. In Chicago's West Side, 35-year-old Paula Prince, a flight attendant, swallowed a capsule and was found dead in her apartment. In Winfield, 27-year-old Mary Reiner, a new mother, died shortly after taking the drug, leaving her infant son behind. And in another corner of the city, a 7th victim whose name would later fade into the shadow of the case met the same grim fate. 7 people, all young, healthy, and unconnected, were dead within a span of 3 days. Their only link? Each had taken extra-strength Tylenol. Panic began to ripple through Chicago. Nurses, doctors, and coroners scrambled to make sense of the deaths. At Northwest Community Hospital, a nurse named Helen Jensen, haunted by the suddenness of the Janis family's deaths, made a chilling discovery. She examined the Tylenol bottle from Adam's home and noticed something off. 6 capsules were missing, and the remaining ones looked strange. Tests confirmed the unthinkable. The capsules weren't filled with acetaminophen. They were packed with potassium cyanide, a poison so lethal that a single grain could kill in minutes. Each capsule contained nearly 3 times the fatal dose. The realization hit like a thunderbolt. Someone had deliberately tampered with the Tylenol, turning a trusted medicine into a weapon of mass murder. By the 1st of October, 1982, the city was in a state of full-blown terror. Police cars roamed the suburbs, their loudspeakers blaring a surreal warning. Do not take Tylenol until further notice. Do not take Tylenol. Drugstores yanked bottles off shelves, and and families rifled through their medicine cabinets, eyeing every pill with suspicion. The news spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and airwaves across the nation. "Tylenol linked to 7 deaths," screamed the Chicago Tribune. "Poisoner on the loose," warned CBS News. The public's trust in over-the-counter drug science unshakable crumbled overnight. People began sniffing their aspirin, inspecting their cough syrups, and even crushing capsules to check for the faint, almond-like scent of cyanide. It was as if every bottle, every box, every shelf held a potential death trap. The scope of the crisis was staggering. Johnson & Johnson, Tylenol's manufacturer, issued a nationwide recall of 31 million bottles, the first mass recall in American history. The company's stock plummeted, and its once dominant 35% share of the painkiller market shriveled to less than 8%. But the human toll was far worse. 7 families were shattered, their loved ones stolen by an unseen hand. Monica Janis, just 8 years old when her father Adam, Uncle Stanley, and Aunt Teresa died, would later describe the pain as a wound that never healed. "It was like a bomb went off in our family," she said years later, her voice trembling. The victims' names: Mary Kellerman, Adam Janis, Stanley Janis, Teresa Janis, Mary McFarland, Paula Prince, Mary Reiner became a haunting litany etched into the city's memory. Investigators, led by a 15-agency task force, including the FBI, Illinois State Police, and local departments, descended on Chicago with a singular mission: find the killer. They scoured drugstores, interviewed pharmacists, and tested thousands of Tylenol bottles. The evidence pointed to a chilling method. The poisoner had likely entered stores, removed bottles from shelves, replaced the acetaminophen in some capsules with cyanide, and returned the tampered bottles to be purchased by unsuspecting victims. The bottles came from different factories, ruling out contamination at the production level. This was no accident, it was a calculated act of terror, carried out with surgical precision. But who could commit such a heinous crime, and why? Theories swirled. Was it a disgruntled employee? A psychopath seeking fame? A terrorist testing the nation's vulnerabilities? The lack of answers fueled the fear. Halloween loomed, and parents across the country, haunted by the specter of poisoned candy, canceled trick-or-treating or inspected their children's halls with forensic scrutiny. The Tylenol murders didn't just kill 7 people, they poisoned the nation's sense of safety, turning everyday acts like taking a pill or eating a treat into a gamble with death. At the center of the investigation loomed a shadowy figure, James William Lewis, a man whose name would become synonymous with the case. Days after the deaths, Johnson & Johnson received a handwritten letter, penned in block capitals, that sent chills down the spines of executives. As you can see, it is easy to place cyanide, both potassium and sodium, into capsules sitting on store shelves, it read. If you don't mind the publicity of these little capsules, then do nothing. So far I have spent less than $50, and it takes me less than 10 minutes per bottle. The letter demanded $1 million to stop the killing. It was postmarked the 1st of October, 1982, before the public fully grasped the scope of the poisonings. The implications were terrifying. The writer knew too much, too soon. Lewis, a 36-year-old conman with a rap sheet stretching back years, was tracked down in New York City after a nationwide manhunt. His past was a labyrinth of aliases, scams, and dark accusations. In 1978, he'd been charged with the dismemberment murder of a Kansas City businessman, though the case was dismissed on technicalities. In 1981, he was convicted of mail fraud for a credit card scheme. Police described him as a chameleon, a man who slipped through life with at least 20 aliases and a knack for evasion. When arrested in December 1982, Lewis admitted to writing the extortion letter but denied any role in the poisonings. "I was trying to help," he claimed, spinning a bizarre tale about targeting his wife's former employer. Yet his knowledge of the crime was uncanny. He described, in chilling detail, how the killer might have tampered with the capsules buying bottles, lacing them with cyanide, and returning them to stores. He even sketched diagrams, showing how cyanide could be funneled into capsules using a drilled pegboard. His fingerprints, investigators later discovered, were on pages of a poisoning handbook that detailed cyanide's lethal properties. Was Lewis the mastermind behind the murders, or merely an opportunist exploiting the chaos? The FBI leaned toward the former, but hard evidence was maddeningly elusive. His DNA, collected in 2010, didn't match samples from the tainted bottles. His claim of being in New York during the poisonings couldn't be fully disproved, yet the timing of his letter, his familiarity with cyanide, and his chilling composure kept him in the crosshairs. He's a walking crime wave, US. Attorney Dan Webb declared at Lewis's 1983 extortion trial, where he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years. But the murder charges never came. The case remained a gaping wound, a puzzle with missing pieces. As Chicago reeled, the nation watched in horror. The Tylenol murders exposed a terrifying vulnerability. Anyone could tamper with a product, and no one would know until it was too late. The poisoner hadn't just killed 7 people, they'd weaponized trust itself. Every bottle on every shelf became a potential coffin, and somewhere, in the shadows, the killer was still out there, watching, waiting, perhaps even laughing. The question hung heavy in the air. Would they strike again? Chicago, October 1982. The city was a cauldron of paranoia, bubbling over with dread and suspicion. The Tylenol murders had ripped through the Windy City psyche like a jagged blade, leaving 7 dead and a nation trembling. The headlines screamed of poison, the airwaves crackled with warnings, and every drugstore shelf felt like a minefield. Yet, in the midst of this terror, something bizarrely, darkly hilarious began to unfold. The people of Chicago, ordinary folks, from soccer moms to cab drivers, transformed into amateur sleuths, sniffing their medicine cabinets like bloodhounds on a scent. It was chaos, yes, but chaos with a twisted charm, a citywide detective game where the stakes were life and death. And oh, how the drama unfolded. Picture it, a crisp autumn evening in the suburb of Schaumburg. Linda Morgan, a 34-year-old bank teller with a perm as tight as her nerves, stood in her kitchen, clutching a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol. Her husband Frank, a burly mechanic, hovered over her shoulder, his eyes darting between the capsules and the flickering television, where Dan Rather's voice droned about cyanide. "Smell it, Lynn," Frank urged, his voice low, as if the bottle might overhear. "They say cyanide smells like almonds." Linda, her hands trembling, cracked open a capsule and held it to her nose, inhaling deeply, her face scrunched up. "Almonds? Smells like regret." Frank grabbed the bottle, dumped its contents onto a paper towel, and began crushing each capsule with a spoon, as if he were Sherlock Holmes unmasking a villain. Across the city, thousands of households mirrored this scene. Families turned forensic chemists, sniffing, poking, and praying their pills weren't laced with death. It was absurd, almost comical, yet the fear was palpable, a cold sweat that clung to every brow. The drugstores were no less theatrical. At a Walgreens in Lincoln Park, a crowd gathered around the pharmacy counter, demanding answers from a frazzled clerk named Jimmy Rodriguez. "How do I know this aspirin ain't poisoned?" shouted an elderly man in a Cubs cap, waving a bottle like a grenade. Jimmy, barely 22 and already regretting his career choice, stammered, "Sir, we pulled all the Tylenol. This is Bayer. It's probably fine." Probably? That word hung in the air like a guillotine. A woman in a fur coat, clutching a bottle of cough syrup, leaned in and whispered, "I heard the killer's hitting other brands now. Check the seals." The crowd gasped, and Jimmy's eyes widened. By noon, the store was a war zone. Shelves stripped bare, customers sniffing decongestants like sommeliers sampling wine, and one man, God help him, licking a tablet to test it. The manager, a chain-smoking veteran named Dolores, finally snapped, grabbing a megaphone. "Stop licking the merchandise, you're gonna poison yourselves." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. This wasn't just Chicago's madness, it was America's. From Seattle to Miami, people eyed their medicine with suspicion. In Des Moines, a hardware store sold out of magnifying glasses as customers inspected pill coatings. In Atlanta, a radio DJ jokingly suggested sniffing parties to check for cyanide, only to be flooded with calls from listeners actually doing it. The nation was hooked, not just on fear but on the thrill of the hunt. Who was this phantom poisoner? A genius? A madman? Every theory was a spark, igniting dinner table, debates, and barroom conspiracies. "It's the Soviets," growled a bartender in Wrigleyville, pouring a shot for a regular. "They're testing us before the big one." His customer, a bleary-eyed accountant, countered, "Nah, it's Big Pharma. They're tanking Tylenol to push Advil." The theories were wild, unhinged, and utterly seductive, pulling everyone into the mystery's orbit. The media fanned the flames. Chicago's WLS television ran a segment titled "Killer in the Capsules," complete with ominous music and grainy footage of empty Tylenol bottles. The anchor, a silver-haired veteran named John Drury, leaned into the camera, his voice dripping with gravitas. "Tonight, a city asks can you trust what's in your medicine cabinet." Ratings soared. Tabloids churned out lurid headlines. "Death on Aisle 5" and "The Cyanide Spectre." Even Johnny Carson, the king of late night, couldn't resist. "Folks in Chicago are so paranoid," he quipped on The Tonight Show. "They're checking their M's for cyanide. Good luck sniffing chocolate." The audience roared, but the laughter carried a nervous edge. The poisoner had turned America's medicine into a punchline and a death sentence. Amid the hysteria, the investigation roared into high gear. The Tylenol Task Force, a coalition of FBI agents, Illinois State Police, and local cops, worked around the clock. Their headquarters, a maze of coffee cups and cigarette butts. They traced the tainted bottles to 5 locations: a Jewel, Osco in Arlington Heights, a Walgreens in Chicago's West Side, an Osco Drug in Elmhurst, a Frank's Finer Foods in Winfield, and a Dominic's in Lincoln Park. The bottles shared no common factory or distributor, confirming the chilling truth. The poisoner had walked into these stores, tampered with the capsules, and slipped away unseen. The task force interviewed 1,200 witnesses, from cashiers to stock boys, but no one recalled a suspicious figure. "It's like chasing a ghost," muttered Agent Roy Lane, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The killer was meticulous, leaving no fingerprints, no DNA, no trace-only bodies. The tension reached a fever pitch on the 5th of October when a new lead surfaced. A pharmacist in Elmhurst, Mary McFarland's hometown, reported a strange customer from weeks earlier. He was in his 30s, maybe. The pharmacist, Ellen Carter, told police, her voice shaky. Wiry guy, dark hair, kept asking about cyanide, said it was, for a chemistry project. Paid cash, left fast. Ellen's description matched no one in the system, but it electrified the task force. Was this the poisoner? Agents fanned out, plastering sketches across Chicago. A lean man with a sharp jaw, eyes like coal, lurking in the shadows. Tips poured in hundreds, then thousands. A gas station clerk in Skokie swore he'd seen the man buying cigarettes. A housewife in Naperville claimed he'd knocked on her door, asking for direction. Each lead was a spark of hope, only to fizzle into dead ends. The city was chasing phantoms, and the killer was laughing. The high noon of this drama came on the 12th of October, when Johnson & Johnson, Tylenol's maker, received a bombshell, a handwritten extortion letter postmarked from New York. The words were cold, precise, and dripping with menace. As you can see, it is easy to place cyanide, both potassium and sodium, into capsules sitting on store shelves. I can produce a dozen bottles in an afternoon. Wire $1 million to the account below, where the deaths will continue. The letter was signed James Lewis, a name that would haunt the case for decades. The task force traced it to a seedy Manhattan hotel, where Lewis, a 36-year-old drifter with a rap sheet longer than Lakeshore Drive, was holed up. When agents stormed his room, they found a man who seemed to revel in the spotlight. Lewis, with his slicked-back hair and sly grin, didn't flinch. "I wrote the letter," he admitted, his voice smooth as silk. "But I didn't poison anyone. I'm just an entrepreneur." His alibi? He was in New York the whole time, nowhere near Chicago. His motive? To help catch the real killer, he claimed. Though his eyes gleamed with something darker, the task force was electrified. This was their man, or so they thought. Lewis knew too much. He described the tampering process with eerie precision, buying bottles, hollowing out capsules, funneling cyanide with a makeshift rig. He even mailed diagrams to the FBI, taunting them with his expertise. The press went wild, dubbing him the Tylenol Man. But the evidence was thin. No cyanide traces in his hotel. No witnesses placing him in Chicago. His fingerprints, pulled from the letter, didn't match the bottles. The task force was torn. Lewis was either a genius criminal or a fame-hungry conman. The climax came at his December 1982 arrest, broadcast live on national television. As agents cuffed him, Lewis turned to the cameras and winked. "You'll never catch the real guy," he said, his voice a velvet dagger. The nation gasped. Was he confessing, mocking, or both? The resolution was maddeningly anticlimactic. Lewis was charged with extortion, not murder. His trial, a circus of accusations and denials, ended with a 10-year sentence, but the killings remained unsolved. The task force, battered but unbowed, shifted focus to new leads, chasing tips about copycat tamperings in California and Texas. Chicago exhaled, but the fear lingered. The city's sniffing frenzy slowed, replaced by a grim acceptance. The poisoner was still out there, and no pill felt safe. Yet, in the absurdity of those Weeks families playing chemist, clerks dodging mobs, and a nation laughing through its terror, there was a strange, seductive unity. Chicago had faced the abyss and come out swinging, even if its punches hit only air. The stage was set for the next act, and the killer, whoever they were, was watching from the wings. October 1982, Chicago. The city was a pressure cooker, its streets buzzing with fear and fascination. The Tylenol murders had claimed 7 lives, turned medicine cabinets into death traps, and unleashed a nationwide manhunt for a phantom poisoner. The Windy City's pulse raced as the Tylenol task forced a sprawling alliance of FBI agents, Illinois State Police, and local detectives chased shadows through drugstores and alleyways. Every clue was a lifeline, every suspect a potential key to unlocking the nightmare. But nothing prepared them for the moment when a name emerged from the chaos, a name that would ignite the investigation like a match to gasoline. James William Lewis. He was no ordinary suspect. He was a chameleon, a con man, a ghost with a grin that could charm or chill. And as the task force closed in, the question burned. Was Lewis the devil behind the cyanide, or just a player in a darker game? The drama began to simmer on the 12th of October, when a letter arrived at Johnson & Johnson's headquarters in New Brunswick, New Jersey. It was handwritten, the block capitals sharp and deliberate, like a serial killer's manifesto. "Gentlemen," it began, "as you can see, it is easy to place cyanide, both potassium and sodium, into capsules sitting on store shelves." The words were clinical, almost seductive in their precision. "I can produce a dozen bottles in an afternoon. If you don't mind the publicity of these little capsules, then do nothing. Otherwise, wire $1 million to the account listed below." The signature? James Lewis. The letter wasn't just a threat, it was a taunt, a dare to catch a mind that seemed to dance just out of reach. The task force, already stretched thin, felt the ground shift. This wasn't a random crank. The writer knew too much. The exact poison, the tampering method, the timing. He was either the killer or someone dangerously close to the truth. In Chicago, the task force's headquarters at the Illinois State Police building was a hive of controlled chaos. Desks overflowed with tip sheets, coffee cups, and ashtrays brimming with cigarette butts. Agent Roy Lane, a grizzled FBI veteran with a nose for liars, pored over the letter, his jaw tight. "This guy's not bluffing," he muttered to his partner, Detective Sarah Connolly, a sharp-eyed Chicago cop who'd seen her share of monsters. Sarah traced the letter's postmark New York City, the 1st of October, and felt a chill. "He wrote this before the recall hit the news," she said, her voice low. "How do you know the capsules were cyanide?" The room fell silent. The implications were electric. Either Lewis was the poisoner, or he had inside knowledge that could crack the case wide open. The hunt was on, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The task force traced Lewis to a Fleabag hotel in Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen, a grimy corner of the city where dreams went to die. On the 13th of December, 1982, FBI agents stormed the Hotel Carter, their guns drawn, hearts pounding. The door to room 1214 swung open, and there he was. James Lewis, 36, lean and wiry, with slicked back hair and eyes that glittered like a predator's. He didn't flinch, didn't run. Instead, he smiled a slow, knowing smirk that sent a shiver through the room. "Took you long enough," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, as if he'd been expecting them. The agents cuffed him, but Lewis was already playing his game, dropping cryptic hints like breadcrumb. "I'm not your killer," he purred, "but I know how it was done." His confidence was maddening, his charm a weapon. As they led him away, a reporter's camera caught his face, and that smirk became the face of the Tylenol murders, plastered across every newspaper in America. Back in Chicago, the task force tore into Lewis's past, and what they found was a labyrinth of deception. Born in Missouri, Lewis was a drifter with a rap sheet that read like a crime novel. In 1978, he'd been charged with the gruesome murder of Raymond West, a Kansas City businessman whose dismembered body was found in a trash bin. The case collapsed on a technicality, but the details were chilling. West's body was hacked apart with a saw, and Lewis, then using an alias, had been seen near the scene. In 1981, he was convicted of mail fraud for a credit card scam, earning a slap on the wrist. He'd used at least 20 aliases, from Robert Vinton to Edward Klein, slipping through life like smoke. Police called him a chameleon, a man who could blend into any crowd, any city, any lie. But what electrified the task force was his obsession with poison. In 1980, he checked out a library book on toxicology, its pages dog-eared at a chapter on cyanide. And in 1982, just weeks before the murders, a Chicago chemist reported selling potassium cyanide to a man matching Lewis's description. The dots were connecting, and the picture was terrifying. The investigation reached its boiling point in January 1983, as Lewis sat in a New York jail cell, awaiting trial for extortion. The task force, desperate for a breakthrough, interrogated him for hours, their questions sharp as blades. "How'd you know about the cyanide?" Agent Lane demanded, slamming the letter on the table. Lewis leaned back, his eyes glinting. "It's not hard to figure out," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Buy a bottle, empty the capsules, fill them with poison, takes 10 minutes. I could show you." He did more than Thave mailed the FBI a diagram, a chilling blueprint of a tampering rig, a pegboard with drilled holes, a funnel, and a bottle of cyanide. The precision was uncanny, the audacity breathtaking. Sarah Connolly, watching through the one-way glass, felt her stomach twist. "He's toying with us," whispered. "He wants us to think he's guilty, but not enough to prove it." The tension soared as new evidence surfaced. A Chicago pharmacist, Ellen Carter, came forward with a bombshell. In late August 1982, a man resembling Lewis had visited her Osco drugstore in Elmhurst, asking about cyanide's shelf life. She remembered his eyes cold, unblinking, like a snake's. "He said it was for a science project," she told police, her voice trembling. But he kept looking at the Tylenol display. The task force cross-referenced her story with security footage from a Jewel Osco in Arlington Heights, where one of the tainted bottles was sold. A grainy tape showed a man wiry, dark-haired, in a cheap jacket lingering near the painkiller aisle. Was it Lewis? The tape was too blurry to confirm, but the possibility sent the investigation into overdrive. Agents raided Lewis's old haunts, from Kansas City dive bars to Boston fluff houses, hunting for witnesses who could place him in Chicago during the murders. A bartender in Skokie swore he'd served Lewis a whiskey in September, but his memory was fuzzy. A motel clerk in Naperville claimed Lewis had checked in under an alias, but the records were lost. Every lead was a spark, every dead end a gut punch. The climax came on the 10th of February, 1983, at Lewis's extortion hearing in a New York federal courthouse. The room was a circus reporters jostling for seats, cameras flashing, the air thick with anticipation. Lewis, in a crisp suit, looked like a movie star playing a villain, his smirk never fading. U.S. Attorney Dan Webb, a bulldog with a reputation for nailing crooks, laid out the case. The letter, the diagrams, Lewis's criminal past. "This man is a walking crime wave," Webb thundered, his voice shaking the room. "He knows how the murders were done because he's the one who did them." The gallery gasped, hanging on every word. Lewis, unfazed, took the stand and spun a tale as slick as oil. "I wrote the letter to expose a flaw in your system," he said, his tone almost playful. "I wanted to help Johnson & Johnson think of me as a consultant. The audacity was staggering. When asked about the cyanide, he shrugged. "Anyone can buy it. Check your local hardware store." The judge, visibly exasperated, leaned forward. "Mr. Lewis, are you admitting to the murders?" Lewis paused, his eyes scanning the room, and then delivered a line that froze everyone. "I'm admitting to being smarter than you." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, spectators whispered, and the task force fumed. It was the high point of the drama moment where the killer seemed to step into the spotlight, only to slip away again. The resolution, when it came, was both electrifying and frustrating. Lewis was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 10 years, a victory for the prosecution, but a hollow one for the murder case. The evidence against him as the poisoner circumstantial, tantalizing but incomplete, fell short of a murder chart. His alibi, shaky but unprovable, held just enough water to keep him out of the electric chair. The task force, exhausted and demoralized, watched as Lewis was led away, his smirk intact. "We'll get you someday," Agent Lane muttered, but the words felt empty. The Chicago Tribune summed it up. Lewis, guilty of something, but not everything. Chicago exhaled, but the city's obsession with the case didn't fade. Lewis's trial had been a spectacle, a dark dance of accusation and evasion that captivated the nation. Was he the mastermind, orchestrating a perfect crime, or a cunning opportunist, feeding on the chaos? The question lingered like a lover's whisper, teasing, unresolved. The task force regrouped, chasing new Ledsa copycat tampering in California, a cyanide purchase in Texas, but the heart of the case remained in Lewis's shadow. For the families of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janus, and the others, justice was a ghost, as elusive as the man who'd sparked the nightmare. And somewhere, perhaps in a dingy bar or a crowded city, the real poisoner watched, their secrets safe, their laughter silent. Chicago, winter 1983. The city was a frozen husk, its streets cloaked in snow and suspicion. The Tylenol murders had carved a wound deep into the Windy City's soul, claiming 7 lives: Mary Kellerman, Adam Janus, Stanley Janus, Teresa Janus, Mary McFarland, Paula Prince, Mary Reinerand, leaving a nation haunted. The poisoner, that phantom of malice, had slipped through the cracks, their identity a riddle wrapped in cyanide. Yet, as Chicago huddled against the bitter cold, a strange alchemy was at work. The terror that had shattered trust was forging something new, a revolution in safety, a legacy of vigilance, and a mystery that burned brighter than ever. The killer was out there, their shadow lingering, and the city's story was far from over. This was no neat ending, oh no. This was a siren's call, luring you deeper into the dark, whispering that the truth might just be one click away. The aftermath was a fever, dream of fear and fascination. Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol, stood at the edge of ruin. Their brand, once a cornerstone of American medicine cabinets, was now a synonym for death. In the sleek boardrooms of New Brunswick, New Jersey, CEO James Burke paced like a caged panther, his eyes fixed on a future that seemed to crumble with every headline. 7 dead, the Chicago Tribune screamed. Poisoner still at large, warned NBC Nightly News. The recall of 31 million bottles had gutted the company's finances, slashing its market share from a commanding 35% to a pitiful 8%. But Burke wasn't a man to surrender. He saw the crisis not just as a wound, but as a chance to rewrite the rules. In November 1982, Johnson & Johnson unveiled a plan so bold, so seductive, it felt like a love letter to a terrified nation. Tamper, evident packaging, triple-sealed bottles, foil caps, plastic wraps fortresses to keep the poisoner's hands at bay. It was a promise, whispered in every drugstore aisle. You're safe now. The public, still raw from the murders, clung to this promise like a lifeline. By spring 1983, Tylenol was back on shelves, its new packaging gleaming under fluorescent lights. Shoppers in Arlington Heights, Elmhurst, and Lincoln Park hesitated, their fingers hovering over the bottles, but they bought. Slowly, then swiftly, Tylenol reclaimed its throne, its market share climbing back to 30% by 1984. The nation exhaled, but the victory was bittersweet. Monica Janus, just 8 when her father Adam, Uncle Stanley, and Aunt Teresa died, stood at their graves, her small hands clutching a photo. "No bottle can bring them back," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. The families of the victims, Marianne Kellerman, mourning her daughter Mary, John Reiner, raising his infant son without Mary, carried a grief that no innovation could heal. Yet, the world was changing, and Chicago was its crucible. The Tylenol murders didn't just save Tylenol, reshaped history. The FDA, jolted by the crisis, rushed through regulations in 1983, mandating tamper-proof seals for all over-the-counter drugs. By 1984, every bottle of aspirin, every tube of cough syrup, bore the mark of Chicago's pain. Foil, plastic, cotton, a silent vow that no one would die like Paula Prince again. The ripple effect was global. Canada, the UK, Japan countries worldwide adopted similar standards. Their pharmacies transformed into fortresses of trust. The poisoner had aimed to destroy, but their legacy was a paradox, a safer world, born from terror. It was a seductive irony, one that made you wonder, did the killer foresee this? Were they watching? Somewhere, their lips curling into a smile as their chaos birthed order. But safety wasn't the only legacy. The murders ignited a cultural obsession with crime, a hunger for the dark corners of the human mind. In Chicago's bars, from Wrigleyville to the South Side, patrons swapped theories over whiskey and beer. "It's gotta be Lewis," growled Tony Rizzo, a cab driver nursing a Budweiser at a dive bar in Logan Square. "That guy's too slick to be innocent." His buddy, a nurse named Carla Evans, shook her head, her eyes gleaming with intrigue. "Nah, it's bigger than Lewis. Someone's still out there, playing us all." The debates were electric, a citywide game of Clue where every stranger was a suspect. True crime books flew off shelves, their covers splashed with grainy photos of Tylenol bottles. Television specials, from 60 Minutes to Unsolved Mysteries, replayed the murders, their narrators' voices dripping with menace. The nation was hooked, not just on fear, but on the thrill of the chase. Who was the poisoner? A genius? A ghost? The question was a lover's whisper, teasing, unresolved. The investigation, meanwhile, was a beast that refused to die. The Tylenol task force, now a leaner but no less dogged crew, chased leads into 1,983 and beyond. James Lewis, the chameleon who taunted them with his extortion letter, remained the sun around which the case orbited. Released from prison in 1995 after serving 12 years for extortion, he slithered back into the shadows, settling in Boston under yet another alias. The FBI never stopped watching. In 2009, they raided his Cambridge apartment, seizing computers, books, and a handwritten note that chillingly echoed his 1,982 letter. DNA tests on the tainted bottles, re-examined with new tech, yielded no match. But Lewis's knowledge's eerie diagrams, his cyanide obsession kept him in the crosshairs. He's either the killer or the world's luckiest con man, Agent Roy Lane, now retired, told a reporter in 2010, his voice heavy with frustration. Lane's partner, Detective Sarah Connolly, went further, her eyes narrowing as she spoke at a Chicago true crime convention in 2015. Lewis knows something, and he's not done talking. The tension peaked in October 2022, on the 40th anniversary of the murders. Chicago was a different city sleeker, shinier, but still haunted. A documentary, Cyanide Shadows, premiered on Netflix, reigniting the case. It featured Monica Janus, now 48, standing in her father's old Arlington Heights home, her voice trembling as she held a faded Tylenol bottle. "I want to know who did this," she said, her eyes burning. "I want their name." The film dropped a bombshell. A retired pharmacist, Ellen Carter, now 78, claimed she'd seen a second suspicious man in her Elmhurst Osco drugstore in 1982, weeks before the murders. "He wasn't Lewis," she whispered, her hands shaking. Taller, quieter, with eyes like he'd seen hell. He bought cyanide and vanished. The task force, dormant but never disbanded, reopened the case, chasing this new ghost. Tips flooded in 1,200 in a single month. A grainy photo from a 1,982 Chicago ATM showed a man matching Carter's description, his face half hidden by a hood. Was he the real poisoner? A partner? A red herring? The internet exploded. forums like Reddit buzzing with theories. The Tylenol killer's still out there, one user posted, and they're reading this right now. The climax came on the 29th of October, 2022, at a memorial vigil in Elk Grove Village, where Mary Kellerman's life had been stolen 40 years prior. Hundreds gathered, their candles flickering against the night. Monica Janis stood at took the stage, her voice raw with emotion. "We're closer than ever to the truth," she said, her words broadcast live on CNN. "Someone knows something. Speak now, or live with the blood on your hands." As she spoke, a man in the crowd, a gaunt figure in a black coat, slipped away, his face obscured. A reporter swore he'd seen him before, at a 1982 crime scene. But when police searched, he was gone. The moment was electric, a spark that set the nation ablaze. Was it the killer, come to gloat, a prankster, or something else entirely? The task force issued a cryptic statement. "New evidence is under review. We will not rest." The world held its breath, but no arrest came. The case, once cold, was alive, its pulse racing. And yet, the resolution was no resolution at all. The vigil ended, the candles burned out, and the killer remained a shadow. Chicago's wound stayed open, its people caught between hope and despair. The tamper-proof seals, the FDA rules, the global safety standards, they were monuments to the victims, but not justice. The poisoner had won, for now. Their identity a secret they carried to the grave, or perhaps not. Whispers of a new lead, a hidden diary, a deathbed confession, swirled in the dark corners of the internet. "The truth is coming," a cryptic post on X declared in January 2023 from an account tied to a Chicago IP. Was it a hoax, a clue, or the killer themselves, teasing one last game? The story wasn't over. It was a cliffhanger, a seductive promise that the next chapter, it's coming, might just unmask the phantom. Want to know what happens next? Dive into the shadows with us on our channel, where the Tylenol murder's final secrets are waiting to be unearthed. Subscribe, stay close, because the killer's still out there, and we're not done hunting.